Hello to everyone. I appreciate your being here today, and I appreciate the organizers inviting me to be here with you. So we'll move to the first slide here. So Zika virus, first of all, for those of you who not know about this, it's what we call single-stranded RNA virus. It's very closely related to dengue, to yellow fever, and Japanese encephalitis, and West Nile viruses. It's primarily transmitted by Aedes mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti, and occasionally by Aedes albopictus. Additional modes of transmission include intrauterine or perinatal transmission, sexual transmission, laboratory exposure, and blood transfusion. Next slide. Zika virus was actually originally isolated in 1947 from a macaque monkey in the Zika forest in Uganda, which you see in this image on the slide. And this is actually a picture I took. The tower is still there, the Zika tower. This was set up in the aftermath of the yellow fever, early epidemiologic studies where it was discovered that yellow fever cases were transmitted by mosquitoes that lived up in the forest canopy. And when the trees were cut down and they fell to the ground, mosquitoes that were there in the canopy would bite people. And then that's how yellow fever outbreaks began. And they got carried from these jungle sites into urban centers, what was transmitted by Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. And so when they understood this epidemiology, they actually built this tower that, outside of Entebbe, Uganda. This was the Wellcome Trust and the Rockefeller Arboviral Research Group, and Entebbe, the Uganda Virus Research Institute. And so they studied these mosquito-borne viruses, and that's actually how Zika was discovered. And there was not a disease originally associated with it until some years later they discovered there was serologic evidence in people. And then the first major outbreak actually occurred in 2007. And only 14 sporadic human disease cases have been seen prior to that time. The 2007 outbreak was in Yap in the Federated States of Micronesia, and there were a population of just a little over 7,000 people, and close to 5,000 infections occurred there. And so there were approximately 73% of the population became infected during that outbreak. Since that time, in 2013 to 14, there were over 30,000 suspect cases that occurred in French Polynesia and in the other Pacific islands. Next slide. The clinical presentation of Zika, usually what occurs is an incubation period of 3 to 14 days, usually it's around a week, and the vast majority of cases are asymptomatic or mild. And most of the most common symptoms we see is just tetrad of symptom presentation characterized by an acute onset of fever, maculopapular rash, which I'll show in the next slide, joint pain or arthralgia, and conjunctivitis, which is sort of inflammation, redness of the eyes. There are other symptoms that have been reported that include muscle pain and headaches. Next slide. The clinical illness, as I mentioned, is usually mild. Symptoms usually last only for several days to a week. This image here shows a very typical Zika type rash that you see. Severe disease requiring hospitalization is uncommon, and fatalities are rare. However, what we have seen some very serious sequelae. Fortunately, they're very uncommon with Zika, but one of these is Guillain-Barré syndrome, which has been reported in patients following suspect Zika virus infection and is strongly associated with infection. Next slide. By far, the most serious concern about Zika and the most serious manifestation of Zika is something that we call congenital Zika syndrome. And so what happens with this, if a woman is infected during pregnancy, Zika virus can pass from the pregnant woman to her fetus on or around before or around the time of birth as well. And then Zika infection in pregnancy is a cause of microcephaly, and which is sort of the most severe manifestation of congenital Zika syndrome. And but it can also be associated with other neurologic disorders, which can include eye defects, hearing loss, impaired growth, and fetal loss. And it's also been linked to other problems such as miscarriage, stillbirth, and very serious birth defects. No reports of infants getting Zika through breastfeeding have been confirmed, and there's no evidence that previous infection will affect future pregnancies, fortunately. Next slide. So in terms of Zika testing, what we recommend currently at CDC is if a patient is experiencing or has recently experienced symptoms of Zika, or if an asymptomatic pregnant woman, or if the patient is an asymptomatic pregnant woman, then we ask the following questions for screening. Does the patient live in or has the patient recently traveled to an area with Zika? If the answer is yes, then we recommend Zika testing. If the answer is no, then you further would ask the question, has the patient had unprotected sex with a partner who has lived or traveled to an area with Zika? And if the answer is no, then we don't recommend testing. If the answer is yes, then we do recommend testing. CDC doesn't recommend Zika virus testing for asymptomatic men, asymptomatic children, or women who are not pregnant. Next slide. So in terms of how one can protect him or herself against Zika, what we typically recommend, and first of all, we want people to know that the mosquitoes that transmit Zika are very aggressive biters. They feed mostly during the day, but this is not absolutely the case. They can also feed in the evenings and very rarely at night, but the mosquitoes, which we have here in the United States, Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, are traditionally known as daytime biters. And so we recommend that people first and foremost are aware of that, and so that they're especially vigilant during this time, and then that they use insect repellents. These actually work very well if they're used according to the label, and some of the products that are out there include active ingredients DEET, picaridin, IR3535, oil of lemon eucalyptus, or paramethane diol, or 2-undecanone. And all these are discussed in greater detail at our website, which you see a link to this at the bottom of the slide. And we always request that people use these according to EPA label. You can also use protective clothing, and this includes light-colored clothing. It's going to lessen the risk of being bitten by a mosquito. You can also use clothing that you have applied repellents to, or in some cases even permethrin, which works as a repellent, but it's also a toxicant. And you can buy permethrin impregnated clothes, which can be worn as well. And then finally, we recommend that people mosquito-proof their home, and you can do this by using screens on windows and by using air conditioning and making sure that you close doors when you come in and out of the house. And the reason why, and this will be discussed a little bit later, is that the mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti and albopictus, that transmit Zika virus typically live in and around houses. In the United States, especially around houses, in water-containing in containers that hold water. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But by maintaining the integrity of your homes, mosquito-proofing especially, and keeping doors closed, this can be very useful in keeping those mosquitoes that are potential vectors out of your house. Next slide. And also, as I mentioned, Zika virus can be transmitted sexually, which is highly unusual for a mosquito or arthropod-borne virus. In fact, it's the first time we've ever observed this. And so for that reason, it's also very important to talk about the other modes of protection, which we know that condoms can reduce the chance of getting Zika from sex, assuming that they're used correctly and effectively, which means that they're used from start to finish transmission. They're used with any form of sex, vaginal, anal, or oral. And so if a woman's pregnant, we recommend that either she use a condom every time that she has sex or not, or to abstain from sex during pregnancy, even if your partner doesn't have symptoms of Zika. Because as I mentioned before, Zika can be very mild, and in fact, some percentage of patients, maybe as many as 20%, are asymptomatic, so they don't even know that they have the illness. So it's possible to have Zika or to have been exposed to it and not realize that you had it. So for this reason, we recommend the use of condoms or abstinence during pregnancy. And then if not pregnant, to avoid getting Zika from sex, also we recommend the use of condoms every time you have sex, or to abstain as long as there's Zika in the area. And if you or your partner develop symptoms of Zika or have concerns, we recommend that you contact your healthcare provider right away for that. And there's more details on all of this, again, at our website. And the link that I provided at the bottom of the slide is for an actual PDF that contains this information. But if you look at the root of that link, www.cdc.gov/Zika, that is a link to all of CDC's information on Zika. And so I would recommend that you go there for more information. Next slide. So this kind of gets into the idea of where is Zika right now. And in terms of global risk, we have a new tool in our website. And basically, you can put your travel destination into the blank here at this web link, and you can determine what your risk is and what precautions you should take. But basically, Zika has been recently reported in 64 countries and territories worldwide, including 50 countries and territories in the Americas, which are reporting active Zika virus transmission right now. Next slide. And this is the epi curve of the Zika pandemic that is from WHO's website, and just shows that, the first cases we're seeing, it sort of trickled on from 2009, actually, and then we have this big jump in 2013 and 14 associated with French Polynesia. And then we had trickles of cases that occurred through 2015, actually in March of 2015 is when it was first reported in Brazil. And then over 2015, these case numbers soared. And, that lag, actually, during 2015 is when we saw a huge number of cases occurring in Brazil. There was a lag in reporting here catching up to that. So this is why you see the trend increasing most sharply in January of 2016. But January of 2016 is sort of what we think of as when it really got going here in the region of the Americas. And it's also when CDC activated our emergency response center. It was very shortly after that WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern. Next slide. This slide shows where we've seen cases of Zika reported in the United States. And the vast majority of these cases are travel-related cases. And you can see travel-related cases, all throughout the United States. The hatch marks are the areas where we actually see local transmission that has occurred. And these in the continental United States are limited to South Florida and to South Texas along the Mexico border. Next slide. For the most recent case counts, and this is updated regularly, weekly at our website, but there have been 5,109 reported cases to CDC, and over 4,800 of these are travel-related cases. There have been 221 local cases in the continental U.S. As I said before, these have been reported from Florida, primarily from the Miami-Dade County area, and then from southern Texas, primarily from Brownsville and Cameron County areas. Other routes of transmission, which include laboratory transmission, sexual transmission, congenital transmission, and the person through an unknown route, account for the remaining 75 cases that you see here. Next slide. So Zika in the United States, as I mentioned before, we've seen these cases in Brownsville and then also in Miami-Dade County, and these are the only places today where we've had local transmission. And so currently we have these demarcated as what we call yellow zones, and for these yellow zones, we recommend that pregnant women should consider postponing travel to these areas. Next slide. For the U.S. territories, as of March 8th, there have been 147 travel-related cases. The vast majority of these, however, were locally transmitted, and most of these cases have come from Puerto Rico. Next slide. This slide shows the current estimated geographic distribution of the two important vectors. And actually, I should say, really, Aedes aegypti is the most important vector for Zika virus, especially in the United States. We've not seen any transmission by Aedes albopictus. Aedes albopictus in laboratory studies has been shown to be capable of transmitting Zika virus, and there have been 1 or 2 outbreaks overseas that have been associated with Aedes albopictus. But the chief concern here in the Americas, and especially in the United States, is with Aedes aegypti. These are very closely related mosquito species, and you see the distribution in these maps. Next slide. So I know there's some questions that people have, but we will hold them and take them at the end. And I'll just say this one last thing, that this is, again, is our website, the www.cdc.gov/Zika. And there's a lot of information here, as you can see, about Zika, symptoms and testing, health effects, information for healthcare providers, and also for mosquito control professionals. There's more technical information here and for prevention and all these other areas. So I'll stop with that, and what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Dr. Joelle Olson. Joelle's the lead entomologist at Ecolab, and she'll continue with the rest of this presentation. Thank you.
And I'm one of the lead entomologists for Ecolab. I'm heavily involved with product evaluations, program development, for some of the target pests that affect structures and our customers' properties. So I'm going to transition the presentation a little bit and focus more on the biology and behavior of mosquitoes. I'm going to talk both in general and specifically to the Aedes species that carries the Zika virus. And lastly, I'll discuss some of the ways that you can be proactive and protect your staff and guests and property from mosquitoes. So let's get started with a general review of some of the key facts about mosquitoes. They require a blood meal to reproduce and water for the aquatic stages to develop into adults. These two elements, both blood and water, allow mosquitoes to thrive in different environments. The water must be like a stagnant source that contains some type of organic debris, and the blood meal preference really depends on the species of mosquito. Some prefer birds, some mammals, and others may even be more specific or specialized to their host. But we'll be talking about those that specifically target humans today. There are over 3,500 species of mosquito total, but only about 175 that we deal with here in the U.S. The two species of mosquitoes that Ben talked about earlier, and those that are responsible for the transmission of Zika virus, are Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, otherwise known as yellow fever mosquito and Asian tiger mosquito. These two mosquitoes are closely related, and they share similar biology and habits. In addition to being active at dawn and dusk, like most other species, and just as Ben mentioned, these two are also really active during the day. They're seeking shelter indoors, and they're looking for potential hosts. They can be persistent biters, too, meaning that they feed multiple times throughout their adult lives, which increases the potential for these two to be successful vectors of disease. As I mentioned earlier, all species of mosquitoes are semi-aquatic, with the egg, larvae, and pupal stages requiring water to develop and survive. The adults require that blood meal to develop their eggs, and the entire life cycle is completed in about 8 to 10 days, depending on temperature and humidity. One thing that's unique about the Aedes, aegypti and Aedes albopictus is that they can develop in as little as just a tablespoon of water. So this makes the identification of those potential breeding sites slightly more difficult. As you can imagine, all the areas on your property that have potential for capturing pooling water for extended periods of time. Potential breeding sites for the two Aedes mosquitoes that are responsible for vectoring the virus may include flower pots, drains, gutters, old tires, tree holes, potholes in the parking lot, and plants that capture pooling water. Even debris or garbage that's scattered in an area can be a problem. Like I mentioned, just a tablespoon of water could be an area like a bottle cap left on the ground or any other type of debris. These areas could also include small ponds, ditches, or other land depressions that could fill with that stagnant type water for several days. The Aedes, they're also, as I mentioned, they're poor flyers, so they tend not to fly too far away from their breeding sources, generally about less than half a mile or so, and they take frequent breaks in their flight patterns. So once they emerge from their breeding sites, they'll be looking for cool, dark areas to rest between host searching and egg laying, and this may include dark hallways, decks, eaves, or other overhangs on the structures as they're attempting to move indoors. They also prefer to rest on vegetation around the structures. This might include thick grass or broadleaf plants because they prefer to rest on the underside of those leaves to remain protected from the sun and other environmental conditions during the day. So mosquitoes are more than just a nuisance. They have the potential to vector many different life-threatening diseases. In addition to Zika virus, which you heard about earlier, Aedes species also have potential to transmit dengue and chikungunya. Other mosquito species have potential to vector things like West Nile virus, malaria, yellow fever, and even encephalitis. And this depends on the location and distribution of the mosquito species in that area. So regardless of where you're located, mosquitoes can have a serious impact to your business, creating negative publicity and generating staff complaints, which can result in unnecessary compensation claims, reduced trust in the brand, or even lowering occupancy rates or lessening customer traffic, depending on the severity of the situation in that area. So there are ways to be proactive, and there are many steps that you can take to protect your customers and your employees at your properties. First, remove any potential breeding sites. This could be as simple as emptying or removing items that catch and hold rainwater, or it could involve filling potholes in the parking lot, or just altering the landscape in any way to reduce potential breeding sites or resting sites for those adult stages. Check your gutters and drains for pooling water sources and clear any blockage that might be creating a mosquito site or mosquito breeding site. Install or fix any damaged screens. This can prevent entry and access into the structure. And leave fans running during the day and night. This creates wind speed that makes it really difficult for mosquitoes to fly through the structure. As I mentioned, they don't fly very well, so any fans moving air around can make it more difficult for them to get inside. Educate your staff and customers on how to prevent mosquito breeding sites and how to protect yourself. And finally, another important step to reducing mosquito pressure at your property is to partner with a pest management company. So in partnering with a pest management company, here's just some of the ways that Ecolab can help. Ecolab has a science-based 3-step program that's specifically designed to help reduce mosquito pressure at your facility. And that first step includes a thorough inspection of the facility to identify potential breeding sites and adult resting sites. Our team's been trained to look for those really small amounts of pooling water or other items that can be eliminated or reduced to remove that pressure. So step 2, if the potential breeding sites cannot be addressed, step 2, as we have listed here, is prevent. That includes treatment of potential breeding sites using products like larvicides. These products are environmentally friendly and developed to specifically target and kill mosquito larvae without harming the environment or other non-target organisms. And the final step, step 3, which is called protect, includes the treatment of potential adult resting sites using specialized equipment that we have to get product to the areas on the structure and the underside of the leaves where adults are typically found resting during the day. This final step also includes the inspection and maintenance of mosquito traps. These are placed in high-risk areas such as outdoor dining areas, pool areas, and they're used to intercept mosquito activity monitor the level of activity, and determine whether service frequency should be increased during times or seasons with high pressure. And finally, as I mentioned, remaining or treating water sources is critical. So Ecolab can work with your team to provide staff training materials and even provide face-to-face training with your team when necessary. When all the components of our program are combined, we've seen some real success. So this is some data that was generated based on a field test conducted in Mexico. The weekly catch rates show a significant reduction in mosquito activity after just 6 weeks of being on the contracted program. We saw 80% reduction in activity, 90% reduction in customer complaints. And here's just one more case study I'd like to share from Rio. This shows the weekly catch rates, also showing a significant reduction in activity. In fact, we saw a 75% reduction after just 6 weeks when this location was on the mosquito program. So these are both great stories. With that, I'd just like to mention that there are a lot of additional resources out there. Ben mentioned a few as well in his presentation. And here's just a link for some more information on general biology and control that's available on the Ecolab website. In addition, here's a picture of our Zika infographic that can also be found on our website. And this concludes our formal presentation. So we will now move into the question and answer portion of the program.
All right, thank you, Joelle. So any questions, again, please put those in the Q&A chat at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We have a couple come in already. The first one is for you, Ben. I know you talked about this a little bit earlier on, but can you expand on what is Guillain-Barré syndrome?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I went over that lightly. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a very uncommon illness of the nervous system, which usually presents as kind of tingling in the extremities, the hands and feet, and then it can progress to muscle weakness and even paralysis. And it's caused presumably by an autoimmune disorder where your body's immune response begins to attack your nerve cells. But this has been seen in a number of different illnesses in the past, and it's one of those sort of rare potential bad outcomes of Zika. And usually, almost no. People rarely, if ever, die from it, but it can be very debilitating, and so it's a significant concern associated with Zika.
All right, thanks, Ben. Another question came in, and I think we might have answered it a little bit, but one of the attendees saw a local company called Mosquito Authority treating outside of residential homes. So the question is, should we look at mosquito treatment at hotel properties?
Yeah, so I can go ahead and answer that one. I'm not familiar exactly with what Mosquito Authority is offering, but the program that I discussed and covered off on, which included inspection, treatment using larvicide products, and treatment of residuals to the structure or the vegetation around the structure, is a very common approach to mosquito control. So I'm guessing they're using something similar there. And the approach that I mentioned, this is a program that definitely would have an impact for hotel properties and something that should be considered if mosquitoes are a nuisance to the customers or there's increases in complaints of biting, or if you are in an area that might be concerned with Zika virus or some of the other diseases that mosquitoes are carrying, or if there's active transmission going on in the area.
All right, thanks, Joel. All right, Ben, I think we had a couple for you that might go hand in hand. So the first question was, how long, once infected, does the Zika virus remain in a person's body? And going along with that, how long will a host continue to be able to spread the virus over time?
Yeah, those are good questions. And, I'll preface what I'm going to say by the fact that this is an ongoing storyline, and we're still very much looking at this. But I can tell you about what we've seen to date. The time that we've seen, the longest times of persistence we've seen really are in men who have been shedding the virus in their semen. And so in terms of the length of time that the virus has been detected, it's been detected now out in a very few numbers of cases. This is not the vast majority. This is sort of the rarest number of cases, but we've seen it out as long as 180 to 200 days that it's been shed, and we have a study that's going on right now where we're looking at continued viral shedding in the semen of men who've been infected. Now, there are a couple of things to say about that. First of all, this is virus is being detected by a test, an RNA test that's looking for viral RNA, and it's not necessarily testing active infectious virus. It's detecting viral RNA in the semen. And the reason that's important is because when you look at the epidemiologic data, and this is kind of getting to the second half of that question, in terms of transmission, we've not seen any sexual transmission occurring that has been beyond 30 days of infection. So it's that first month when, the risk is highest. But certainly because we are continuing to see viral shedding out, for these longer periods of time, we recommend 6 months currently for the so-called safe zone to wait beyond six months once infected. So, and we've seen transmission, sexual transmission, go in both directions from men to women, but also very rarely from a woman to a man. So that can occur as well. In addition, transmission by the man. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ben. All right, next question. I think this one might be for Joelle, and Ben can certainly jump in as well. If we have a pond on one of our campuses, should that water be treated?
Sure, I can start with that one. So I think first off, the situation would have to be evaluated. So the question is whether or not that pond is stagnant water that is a potential breeding site or not. Also, that might depend on just the size of the area, the size of the pond, if the water is able to move. So really, initial inspection and evaluation, there's even tests that can be done where we do larval dipping to see if there's active mosquitoes in the area, but that should be determined first. And if it is, in fact, a potential breeding site, then there are products that can be applied to help reduce any larval stages that might be developing in that source. And so this is one of those situations where it's really important to partner with your pest management provider because they can help you determine whether or not that site should be indeed treated.
Great. Thank you, Joelle. All right, Ben, we have another question for you around transmission. So if someone in your region is infected with Zika while they're traveling, if they then come back home and are bitten by a local mosquito and that mosquito bites someone else, is that a possible means of transmission?
Okay, so let me make sure I got your question. So if a person is traveling, they become infected, they come back to the United States, can they be a source of infection for local mosquitoes and being transmitted that way? Is that the question?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the way these cases are. That's our biggest concern here in the United States, in areas where we have travelers who are exposed and then they come back to the United States and they'll have virus circulating in their peripheral bloodstream, usually up to maybe 2 weeks on the average at the longest period of time. But during that period of time, and the incubation period for the viruses, can be around 10 days or so. That's the time from which you are bitten by the mosquito to when you begin to have symptoms. This can be usually from around a few days up to as long as a couple of weeks, but as early as like 2 or 3 days even. But this time when the patient is either in the very early days of their illness or they've not started having symptoms yet, is when they're at greatest risk of being bitten by a local mosquito, and then that mosquito transmitting the virus on its next blood feed to someone else. So yeah, we're very concerned about that, and that is, in fact, how the virus gets introduced into the United States. And then once it's here, and if a person has the illness and there are local mosquito populations around them, those can become infected, and then that's how we have these local outbreaks or local transmission events that have occurred in South Florida and in Texas, South Texas.
All right. Thanks so much, Ben. All right. Question for Joelle. Do you recommend fogging for mosquitoes?
Okay, so fogging is a traditional method of control that's been used for mosquitoes. And what fogging really is it comes down to the droplet size of the product that's being applied, with the intention of getting the product up in the air to knock down any of the live adults that might be flying in the area. So with that, it's really just a short-term solution, short-lived, not long-term protection of the area. In fact, it's within minutes or hours that the product is dissipated and then it's not effective anymore. So it was a traditional approach. It's still used in some cases today to clear out a large venue or area for mosquito control. But a better approach, and with some of the newer technologies and developments that have been going on lately, is that there's a lot better equipment, a lot of better products. And specifically when we're talking about the Aedes aegypti or Aedes albopictus species, and based on their behavior, doing more targeted approaches and targeted applications of the larvicides to the breeding sites, and in fact using specialized equipment and getting product to those dark, cool areas where the adults are resting during the day, as well as in the vegetation. There's just better products and better equipment out there today to get more long-term results. And that's kind of what I was showing with some of the case studies that I covered off on, is when you've got all those steps using those products and equipment, you can you can control and reduce the pressure over extended periods of time versus just some short-term approach like fogging.
All right. Thanks so much, Jill. All right. So we have about 2 more questions, it looks like, for Ben. So if you have any more questions, please submit those. So next one, Ben, for you. Are all 175 species of mosquito in the United States capable of transferring the Zika virus?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. And fortunately, the answer is no. As I mentioned before, Aedes aegypti is by and large the most important vector species. And then behind that, Aedes albopictus. No other mosquitoes that we have in the United States have been shown to be capable of transmitting Zika virus, even though there have been some reports, that maybe in some places, but those have not been confirmed. And so today, epidemiologically, as well as sort of biologically, it's really just those 2 species that I mentioned. And in fact, that's true for most all the diseases that we have here in the United States. The vast majority of mosquitoes that are here are pest species, and they're not involved in transmission of known diseases.
Great, thank you. All right, and one more question for you, Ben. I know you talked a lot about transmission, but one kind of clarifying or summary question. So how long will the virus remain in an infected person, or is it going to be a lifetime that Zika could remain in one's body?
Yeah. Now, fortunately, infections in people are short-lived, and I mentioned this about shedding the virus in semen, but there's no evidence that people remain viremic, meaning that they have virus in their bloodstream, for more than a couple of weeks. And there's no evidence that if you have the virus as a woman, and then like during or not associated with the pregnancy or whatever, you get over it. There's no evidence that later pregnancies are affected by a previous Zika infection. So that's fortunate. So the infection seems to be acute. It seems to end, and there doesn't seem to be relapses or continued persistence of infection, with this one exception of transmission by semen, and that's sort of that story's still open, and we're following that one. Did that answer the question?
Yep, that's perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for your participation, and thanks for the great questions that you submitted. And one last question we got a few times was, are you giving a copy of the topics discussed today, or will there be a copy of this presentation? So a recorded version of this presentation will be on ecolab.com next week if you'd like to share. Also, all of the information that Ben presented is on the CDC website, so you can go to the CDC website for a lot more information on Zika and tips for prevention as well. So thank you again. We appreciate your time and have a great rest of your day.